In L&D, if you can't tie your work to a business outcome, you're operating on borrowed time.
Sarah Wood is the Revenue Enablement Specialist at Kinaxis, a position she moved into after a number of years in dedicated L&D roles. And in this episode of In L&D, she joined us to unpack the reality of what L&D influence looks like. We discussed how we can work within constraints and still do great work, why small improvements can have a big impact, how to be more pragmatic when brought into projects late, and a lot more. So let's get into this episode of In L&D. Sarah, thank you so much for coming on the In L&D podcast. Would you mind kicking us off by completing that sentence, please?
Absolutely. So I'm going to say, in L&D, if you can't tie your work to a business outcome, you're operating on borrowed time. I'm going to qualify that a little bit now that you've got the soundbite. So I say that for L&D, but I would also say this is the same for sales enablement, RevOps, sellers themselves, product development, probably everyone. But I think for L&D, we need to be thinking about data.
Yeah. You don't have to sell it to me. I think one of the things I always get, I'm going to segue quickly into, I'm from a marketing background much earlier than I normally do in these conversations, but that is always the same challenge for us as well. It's all these top of funnel and upfront metrics are great, but what's happening that's driving us towards a business outcome here? So I can fully relate to that challenge. First of all, I'd love to get into what's kind of shaped that belief. Where from your experiences, has that come from in terms of if we're not tying it to business outcomes, then we're going to be on borrowed time?
Yeah, I think that one of the things that really brought it like some crystal clarity to that was after the COVID explosion for L&D roles, there was a massive spike in the need for online training. Obviously, everyone was suddenly at home and we couldn't have those workshops, and so there was a massive increase of roles available for people in L&D it just was huge. When I changed jobs during that time, I ended up with 3 job offers in 1 week. And that's not to say I'm amazing. It's just to say there was a lot of opportunity. And so at the time, it felt like the world was our oyster as L&D professionals. And we were like, we can just, print money. No, not really. But there were a lot of opportunities. Because the new entrants to the field had a different experience to existing L&D professionals, we came into that with a different set of expectations, feeling like we had influence and authority. But as time went on, realizing that that doesn't necessarily equate to actual political capital in your organization. So although you as a person who came into it with that feeling of expansion and excitement and opportunity, you're still in a business that has its ways of working, has its functions, has its roles. And most L&D roles are individual contributors or mid-level. They don't own revenue targets, organization design, compensation plans, hiring standards, performance management systems. We don't necessarily have that level of influence. So the discourse that I was seeing on about L&D on LinkedIn, for example, didn't really match the actual day-to-day.
Yeah.
So that's something that there's been that mismatch there has caused a little bit of friction.
Yeah. And for the benefit of people listening, the reason I reached out to you to have this conversation is about a month ago, you posted about L&D not necessarily needing to rebrand itself to have influence or get a seat at the table. And you mentioned some of those challenges about being an individual contributor and having limited capacity or having to work within restrictions like access to the data you have. And it really resonated with people. I checked before we jumped on the call and 43 comments already, which is
Oh,
shows you
golly.
the volume of how that's resonated.
Yeah, absolutely. And I don't get a whole lot of traction on my LinkedIn posts, so to have 43 is a big deal. But those sorts of posts, they get the idea of, oh, we need a seat at the table. We need to reinvent L&D. We need to think of ourselves in a different, with a different language or a different definition. They always get high engagement on LinkedIn. Everyone's like, yeah, rah, 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 let's do it. But actually, it causes a lot of like, maybe not depression, that's probably too heavy of a word, but a lot of like frustration in people who are like getting all excited about this on LinkedIn, but the reality is that we work within constraints. We always work within constraints, and we can't necessarily go out there and change people's minds in the way that it's positioned on LinkedIn.
Yeah.
But having said that, we can. There are opportunities.
Yeah, and I wanted to come back to that point you made around not having access to things because, as per your LinkedIn post, people want to affect change, but if you don't have access to a lot of the stakeholders or the systems or the data that you need to influence change, that can make things really difficult, can't it? So seeing lots of things that say you need to really revolutionize what you're doing while you have this disconnect of what do I actually have access to or ownership over. From your
Mm.
experience, how, I guess that is, well, it must be incredibly challenging to do that in an actual role where access can be limited and the narrative is you should do this, you
Yes.
should do this.
Yeah. Yeah, and so I have a fun story about that actually. Earlier on in my career, it was so as an individual contributor, you're really dependent on not so much your influence in an organization, but your manager's influence. So
Mm.
I had a really good relationship with my manager, and we had a very collaborative back and forth, which was fantastic because it gave me opportunities to push boundaries a little bit, to explore opportunities, and to try new things. So we were very much in a function in that organization of L&D as an order taker function. You go out and you just we're telling you we need training. Go make the training. The end. Okay, this is where we're at. Fine. But the training isn't working. So we were given this task of like, okay, we've got we've got a system, a training program that's already in play on the LMS. It's a series of videos explaining a technical filling in paperwork process. And sellers, because even though I wasn't in sales enablement at the time, I was still serving sellers through the L&D function, and they weren't filling in the paperwork correctly. Therefore, it was kicking back and it was causing problems with customers.
Mm.
And it wasn't like highly technical, but it was attention to detail. It was like specific. So the videos were meant to walk through it step by step by step by step. Nobody was watching them. They figured out, long story short, they figured out if they fast forward through the videos, an hour and a half is actually 30 seconds, and it ticks off that they've completed it, gets their manager off their back, gets them back out onto the shop floor. Job done. They were still making the errors, clearly.
Yeah.
So talking this through, because the data aspect, the data capture, all we had access to ourselves as a team was the LMS. So we could go and look at the back end and say, right, okay, this is meant to be an hour and a half. That's an hour and a half of video content. Everyone's whipping through it at hyper speed. So clearly we have to fix this. So talking to the manager, he went off and he spoke to the ops team and found out the top 10 errors. What are the top 10 errors? So we decided let's focus on that first, because the top 10 errors actually, it might have even been the top 5 errors, were causing 95% of the problem. So I said to the manager, okay, nobody's going to look at these videos. They're not doing it. But if we pull those top 5 errors and I do some screenshots and some bullet points, and they can just scroll through and read as and when they need it, and they can just dip in and out, then they can then we're actually hitting the mark.
Yeah.
So we were still an order taker function. We were still providing training, but it was within those constraints, we came up with a creative solution that met the needs of the business. And
Yeah.
so that was something that that's a story that I lean into quite a lot when I'm talking about these issues, because I think it's a really succinct example of how you as an L&D professional can still meet the business needs and hit the mark, like data wise,
Yeah.
within quite extreme constraints.
Yeah. No, I love that. It's a perfect example because you're thinking about what's the end outcome? You mentioned things like conversations with customers and the process failing. You're saying, well, what are
Mm,
the key things that contribute to that? And then actually, how can we respond to just those key things? Because then 90% of the problem is solved.
yeah,
Whereas if you're maybe
yeah.
obsessed about the data that you didn't have access to, or only trying to lead with the data you had access to, which is around the consumption, like those, I guess
Mm,
those were good signals of what was and wasn't working. But fundamentally, the best thing for you to do in that case was, like you said, speak to someone with the influence who could explain to you what was causing the problem, and then simply say, and then it's an easy pitch, I guess, for you, that if you say,
mhm,
we create this, it will solve 90% of these problems, and that's most of the
mhm.
problem solved.
Yeah, yeah, absolutely. And it was, and then that product, that learning product, I suppose I could call it,
Mm,
was used in ways that we didn't necessarily expect because it was they picked it up, and instead of it being a just a course that people had to go through, managers were pulling it into their onboarding because at that point we didn't have a structured onboarding, that managers were just doing it ad hoc, but they were like, this is a tool that's useful, so we're going to add it into our onboarding experience, and this is people something that people can look at any point. So
mm.
it was good. It was a very good experience.
I think that is a brilliant example. I really like that. We also spoke about, when we had our first conversation, that
Mm,
the more we focus on unrealistic things rather than what's possible, the more we set ourselves up to fail. So I just wanted to touch on that and get your thoughts around, like, expectation setting for yourself in a role. What does that look like if
mm.
you do focus on unrealistic things a lot of the time?
Yeah, I mean every project is a learning experience. So even in the role that I am in now, although I've said like I've moved into sales enablement because of there's a stronger tie to metrics and data, and it's easier to see the impact of my work on the business. It's still like there's still very much a winning hearts and minds sort of thing that needs to happen because I, as someone who creates training, am leaning on other people to provide me the content. We have to have a strong relationship. We have to work together. And sometimes I'm not brought in at the right time in the project. So the cycle of the project. So a recent one, I was brought in really late before the launch of a new initiative. And as a result, like I wasn't able to bring the full scope of what I could offer because I didn't like I was still it was just too late. It was too late for me to come in and do everything that I could do. So that there's still those constraints of frustration of not being able to do as much as I could do. So in that situation, I could have done a lot more, couldn't, didn't have time. So instead of trying to squeeze it in or trying to do the whole shebang and like, oh, here's this suite of enablement opportunity and we're just gonna have to like figure it out. It was very much like, okay, well, this is the capacity, this is how much time we have, this is how much I can give to this team, and it's not everything I could do. It's not my best work, but it's done. And I think sometimes with the work that I do, done is better than not. So we just get it out the door and
Yeah,
we do it.
I was
And we
expecting you to
learn
say,
from it.
I thought you were about to say done is better than perfect there, but done is better than not done is even
Yeah.
even
Yeah,
more
yeah,
to be said, isn't
yeah.
it?
Well, that's it. It was like, well, we could not do it this way, or we could get it out the door. Like,
Yeah,
that's it.
yeah, yeah,
So, and there's really no point in, I think going back to the idea of relationships, there's no point in undermining relationships with people in other teams to focus on, well, this is the best enablement approach. This is the best learning approach. Like, nobody cares how the sausage is made as long as it's made. Like,
yeah.
that's all. So I have to be very pragmatic as well.
I think that's the challenge, isn't it? Of, you want to come in and say, well, in an ideal world, I'd do it like this, but we don't live in the ideal
Mm,
world a lot of the time. So
mm,
that's really, I think, a great point to consider. I wanted to ask you a little bit about one other thing you mentioned to me before we get into any advice on how people can then work within the remit of what's actually possible. But you mentioned before that organizations are often quite big, or quite slow. They're not dynamic. It
Mm,
can move
mm.
slowly. So the idea that you can really influence change in a big organization that is quite rigid, that's also something to consider when we think about being realistic, isn't it?
Yeah, absolutely. I think there's I think of the people that I create training for as my customers, and I think of that from a like a marketing perspective, although I'm not a marketer. I have to win hearts and minds from people. And so an example would be in my current organization, the enablement function has lived in the customer enablement space for a while. And then after I joined, about 6 months after I joined, we moved to report directly into RevOps, which is really where sales enablement should
Mm,
sit. But because of that distance, we were trying to serve an audience of sellers that we didn't like we didn't have a reporting line into them. We didn't have connection, like really strong connections with them. And so it was just not, there was a lot of friction. So moving into RevOps was not my choice. I agreed with it, but I didn't have any influence over it. And as a result of moving into that function, I was able to build stronger relationships with people. But it's taken a year really to build relationships and to build my reputation in the business,
mm,
and running consistent programs, showing up, being there, being the face of enablement, being someone they can turn to when they need help, or knowing where they can get the help, and being someone who's reliable and dependable. And that's people from the customer service team, people from the partners team, people from the sales team, people cross functionally in marketing and product and rev ops and everywhere.
mm.
And that's required a lot of patience and just consistency and just showing up and being someone that is good to work with, that gets the job done. And those are the kinds of things that, no, you don't get a lot of likes on LinkedIn when you say, "Oh, I did my job." And
And it
but
took a
that is
year.
how it works. Yeah. Yeah. And also I think another thing that I've really thought about as well from a modern day perspective of how you work within an organization remotely, I think it takes twice as long to build your reputation,
Mm,
at least,
yeah,
because you're so distant from each other. The only
yeah,
times you interact with each other is through like specific calls. So it's really difficult to build that reputation remotely as well. It's not impossible. I've worked remotely exclusively for years and years, but it's something to bear in mind.
yeah. Has now you've seen those relationships build and it's taken maybe a year, but you're coming
Mm,
to that point now where you are that trusted source for people. Have you found it easier to understand what the business outcomes are or be involved earlier in the process? Has that helped?
yes,
Or is it too soon to say?
absolutely. Yeah. Yeah. It's a combination of things. I have like the pulse of the sellers because I've got relationships with sellers themselves, so I'm hearing what they're saying directly, which is really great. But also being involved in the right meetings at the right time, and an example of this would be that challenge that I talked about before, where I wasn't brought in the project until quite late in the game. Now I'm able to say, right, I need to know what's going on, even if I don't action anything, even if it's not time for enablement to start building content and start delivering it because it's still too early in the project. I need to be on those calls. I need to be part of the conversation so that I'm seen by default as a trusted advisor of that function. I'm not in a leadership role, but I am in a senior role, and so I am brought in on those conversations earlier than perhaps I would have. Well, I definitely would have been earlier in my career.
Yeah,
Um, but so there is an element of that, and that's something really to call out. Like if you're a junior, like your influence is limited by default. That's okay. It's not an issue, but it's just something to be aware of.
yeah. Okay, so at this point, we know we need to connect what we're doing to business outcomes, so we're not on borrowed time. We know we have to be realistic about the time and capacity we have available to us and
Mm.
the context of our business. So, with that in mind, what can we do to ensure that we're still doing our best work that's connected to business outcomes and is in the realms of what's possible, which is a big challenge, but yeah, what are some
Um,
of the ways you've seen that kind of work?
I think uh, right. So what one of the things that I've been thinking about is how important it is to be proactive within the limits of the scope of your role. Um, I I would say that creating training, regardless of what your role title is, L&D, sales enablement, revenue enablement, whatever it is, you trade on relationships. Like you build relationships of trust with other people in order to get the content. But if you're sitting around twiddling your thumbs, waiting for people to do stuff for you as a favor, because it is a favor, let's be honest, it's not their day job.
Mm,
They don't really care. They don't. So, but I do. So, what do I do to make this as frictionless as possible? I go into those meetings fully prepared. I do the prep work. I create like something for them to edit. Subject matter experts, like they don't know how to build training, and that's that because it's not their job, it's mine. So I create stuff for them to rip apart or put metaphorical red lines through or a proof. Like that's how you get things going. That's how you build the trust with them. It's like I'm you're not here to do my job for me. You're here to sign off on the validity of the content. So here are my ideas. Duh, 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 duh.
mm.
Is it right? Is it wrong? Why? I don't understand the nuance of the technical product. I'm not as close to that team as you are. So I need you to just say yes or no to things. That it doesn't matter what your like junior, senior, whatever role is, you can always do stuff like that. So it's the relationship piece that is like 90% of the job, really.
Is the framing when you're going to those conversations, is it this thing that we're putting together is to help you with X, Y, and Z? To your point about people not necessarily caring unless they know why it's going to benefit them. So what's the
Exactly,
framing
yeah.
that you're going into those conversations with?
Yeah, absolutely. So, for example, if I'm building product training and I'm working with the product subject matter experts, I'm like the whole point of this is so that you're not getting pinged with calls all day. Let's make sure that we're hitting those things that you keep getting asked about over and over and over again so that you we can just point them in the direction of the training and they can go do that and they can leave you alone. And that you can come into like high value conversations like, oh, we're right on the cusp of signing a deal with a customer and they need you to come in and answer these highly technical questions rather than coming in at the demo stage of a sale, like that kind of thing. Definitely winning their hearts and minds and speaking their language and understanding where their challenges are and how this can lift some of those challenges off their plate.
Mhm. Makes complete sense. I think that leads us nicely to the point about revenue and enablement being something that is quite inherently tied to outcomes or numbers, isn't it?
Mm,
You'd mentioned to me before about this idea of breaking things and learning quickly and understanding the influence of what's happening on those end goals. Like the sales cycle can be quite long, it can be volatile,
mm-hmm,
there can be
mm-hmm,
variables. So we can't
mm-hmm.
necessarily always hedge our bets that what we're going to do is going to work. And so tell us a bit about that idea, what you've learned from revenue enablement around breaking things and learning to get to outcomes.
Yeah, yeah. I think because things move so fast in sales, even if you've got like a long sales cycle, things still move quite fast. And so there's high pressure in that. Like you got to make things happen. But also, if it doesn't work, bin it, move on, get something else out there. Just
Mm,
try it, see what happens. So, there's an example of this is I'm putting time bound expectations on some live trainings that I'm developing and running, where it's like, all right, guys, you've got 20 minutes to deliver this piece of content. Um, and it needs to be something by the end of those 20 minutes, sellers need to know they have to go do it within 7 to 14 days. Like, and we're going to be measuring it. We're going to be following what that action is.
Mm,
So it could be as simple as sending a piece of content to a customer or prospect. Like, here is a limited time offer that we're launching, and here is the content that you can send that customer, and you have 2 weeks to do it, and we're going to track it on the system because we can. So go do it. Here's how to do it. Here's what to give them. Go do it.
yeah.
And those sorts of things, like, it's fast, really, really fast. But what reason why we're able to do that is because we've got access to the system to be able to track it. So this is the metric side of it that I find really interesting. But it doesn't, when I talk to people about this, I'm like, when you're delivering this sort of training to like 200 plus people, if you move the needle a tiny bit, the impact of that like is
Mm,
big. So it doesn't, we're not here to, like, I don't know whether they say boil the ocean.
yeah, yeah.
We're not here to change everything at once because you can't. But if you change one thing and you know how to track that one thing, then you learn from it. And it's either, like I said, you bin it because it didn't work, or you learn from it and you build on that. I think move fast, break things, but not actually break things. Move fast and learn about, learn from it.
Yeah. No, when you said about 1% better, I think immediately my brain, when I thought about business outcomes and the way you framed the sentence at the start was the final outcome. Like, we're going
Mm,
from what we want to do to the final thing, which is 2 million in pipeline, for example, or
right. Yeah.
400 new deals. But actually, we can be a lot more realistic about all of the framing, what we're asking people to do, and be realistic about what the outcome is going to be. If you use this for 2 weeks and it helps move the needle on two or three of your deals, then everybody is going to win. So it doesn't need to be like, this is going to take
Yeah.
you 4 hours and it's going to
Yeah.
be the golden goose or silver bullet for us to get to 20
Yeah.
million revenue or whatever.
That there isn't one, is there? That's
No.
the thing. Like, there's a lot of little decisions, a lot of little
Mm,
changes that add up to something big. There isn't one big change, at least from my experience.
yeah. I think that's a great mindset, isn't it? What can I influence that will have an impact on how we get to our business outcome, as opposed to what can I do that is directly responsible?
Mm,
It's about those different levers that you can pull and what you can, to our point earlier, what you can and can't do. If you can
yeah.
improve a few parts of the process by 3, 4%,
Hmm.
even 1%, that will have a massive benefit. So actually,
Yeah.
that's changed the way I think about. I'm not so binary between like the business outcome is the very final thing we have to do. It's those small things along the way that you mentioned.
Yeah. Yeah. Absolutely. Um, yeah, it's been a helpful mindset shift for me as well, because it's overwhelming to think, oh, I'm responsible for my part of this. Yes, but your part of it is orchestration within a whole. It's not, you're not isolated. It's not all on you, and it can't be, because you're part of an organization of
Yeah.
people.
You mentioned as well binning it if it's not working, and
Yeah.
thinking about our earlier point of often an organization can be quite rigid and things can take a long time. We do need to try and think faster and bin it if it isn't working. I think the challenge there is, if I wedded to something for too long and it's not working, then I damage my internal credibility. But if I'm more
Mm.
willing to test it and say, this isn't working, let's move to something else. The question I was trying to get to there, it took me a while, was have you found that's helped your credibility or relationships internally to just draw a line under something that's not working and move on to something else and not take up too much of people's resource and bandwidth?
Absolutely. Yeah. Because what I like to say is to people when I'm having these sorts of conversations with my stakeholders is, like, I'm in my ivory tower of perfect training ideas. What is actually going to work in the real world? Tell me. Because these are great ideas that I love because I made them, but I need them to be tested. Is it actually going to work? And I'm not going to be offended if it's not going to work. Just tell me, because none of us want to waste our time on something that's not going to work.
Mm,
Um, so that opens the floodgates to people feeling like, okay, psychological safety. We can talk about this in real terms. This isn't, someone's not going to like get upset. Cool. Okay. Now you then have to pull back, because that also opens the floodgates to complaints. Lots of people are like, well, everything sucks and I'm going to tell you why. and
yeah,
then I'm like, okay, cool. So how are we going to fix it? And they're like, I don't know. It's like, it can't be fixed. It's just terrible. I'm like, okay, I'm going to go away with this and think about it for a while. But and that's fine. I think you have to go into those sorts of conversations. Like, you never, as they say with surveys, never ask a question you don't want to hear the answer to.
yeah,
Like, don't open that if you're not willing to look at those can of worms and figure out what's valuable and not. But yeah, it's there's a level of lack of ego and humility. Like, I know what I'm doing, but I don't know your world.
mm,
So how do I take my experience and bring it into your world and make it something valuable?
yeah. I think it's so hard with feedback, isn't it, about filtering out what is and isn't
Mm,
helpful, especially if we're looking through that lens of what's actually going to help us get closer to our business outcomes or our goals. If our mindset is that, well, we want to take all of the feedback on and try and action as much of it as possible, we might spend a lot of time changing things that wouldn't
yeah.
really have a massively tangible benefit.
Oh yeah. No, and I definitely spend time saying with my team as well. I say to them things like, wow, they're complaining, but they still have to do it. Oh well, too bad.
Yeah. Yeah, that's it. They're just some non-negotiables, aren't there? I
Yeah.
mean,
Yeah.
sometimes it's just enough for people to hear. Do you know what? We've heard that, we've taken that on board. We've heard that this particular process is frustrating, or this particular thing doesn't work as well as we'd like it to. But as per our earlier point of what's possible and what we have
Yeah.
capacity for, sometimes you do just need to communicate back that we've heard it, but there's not a lot we can change. And even
Yeah.
sometimes that's enough, isn't it?
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
So I think the only thing that we didn't discuss that we wanted to discuss before this was this idea of the middle ground between revenue enablement and
Mm,
L&D. And
mm.
I think you talked a bit throughout this conversation about what you've learned from corporate L&D, what's working for you in revenue enablement. What's kind of the middle ground, if there was anything there?
Well, what's really interesting is there's been a report that's come out just recently, Global Sentiment Survey 2026. And I was reading it, and what's interesting is there's a lot of chatter in the L&D space about moving into more what is it, a coaching culture and capability system approach,
Mm,
and using data, because analytics isn't just about technical development, it's strategic, it responds to the business in a deeper way. And so it looks to me that some of the reasons why I moved from L&D to sales enablement, I've just moved a little bit faster than what L&D is actually doing. I think that there's that idea, and I've floated this on LinkedIn with people. I'm like, I think L&D and enablement need to come closer together, and we need to, like, enablement sometimes doesn't have the foundational, like, adult learning principles elements to it that would be really beneficial, that I've been able to really lean on as I've moved into this space. So that's really a good thing for enablement to learn, and then L&D to learn from enablement in the data, the analytics, the being more strategic, and not just the smiley face stuff
mm,
that L&D people feel really happy about, which is great. It's great that people like do that, but what are they doing afterwards? That's always been what I've been more
mm.
interested in. But it sounds like that is happening. So that middle ground is already existing. And if anybody listening to this is feeling similarly, please reach out. I'd love to like talk more about it, because I find this very interesting that we have so much to learn from each other, L&D and enablement.
Yeah, completely agree. I lied when I said there was one other thing
Oh,
So that's
okay.
another thing we wanted to discuss as well. Only because you put a great example in the kind of the doc that we were using to collaborate, but
Hmm.
it's about this idea of proving behavior change. And
Yeah.
this is something I've heard loads and loads and loads over my experience in L&D. It's the thing people want to see is behavior change. Proving behavior change can be difficult.
Hmm.
What's kind of the answer there, in your opinion?
It's proving behavior change is, I mean, it's just tied to outcomes. What are you trying to change? Like what are you looking at? Like, say for example, you don't have a very strong coaching culture with your manager layer. And I've always said that without managers, training is the tail wagging the dog. We can put out as much training as we want, and if
Mm,
the managers are saying to their team, that's a waste of time, get back on the phone,
yeah.
or what is this? I've never even heard of it. Like, we're not going to get anywhere. If you get there was a really strong example in an organization I worked for where they had an amazing onboarding program. Really, like, just got the new people really excited, really into it, so looking forward to their new role. And it was a complete whiplash effect when they actually got in there with their managers and started working day to day, because the culture that they were expecting from the onboarding was not the culture that they were
Mm,
receiving from their manager.
mm,
And so the managers are huge. So I think in terms of behavior change, if you don't think about managers, then you're going nowhere. Managers are the key really to everything. So from like the perspective of coaching culture, like I mentioned, how can you support the managers in supporting their team? And I think that winning hearts and minds piece is also really important. So getting them on side, understanding their world, and giving them the tools they need to have a successful team, you'll see a lot of change actually.
brilliant. So we're coming close to time. I wanted to see if you had final advice for those people who maybe have found tying what they're doing to those business outcomes a challenge, or working in the remits of what's actually possible to do that. Any final advice for those people?
Yeah, so as we kind of have talked about before, like, we all have limits to our role. So just make sure that you really understand what that is. I've been in roles where I've not understood the limits, and it's been very frustrating. And it's meant that I've attempted to do things that have been against the company culture, and it's caused clashes, or I've had conversations that really have ended up being a waste of everyone's time because we've gotten excited about an initiative and then it's fallen flat or it's just not taken off. So really clearly understanding your remit and the boundaries, and then seeing where you can go from there. Because just because those boundaries exist now doesn't mean they always will, but working within them. And they say from a creative perspective that when you actually have boundaries, creativity flows even more
Mm,
than if you can just have do everything and anything. If you only had a pencil to draw with, your pencil shading skills would be amazing, right? But if you used every pencil possible, then you wouldn't have great pencil shading skills. So if you've only got a pencil, you can do a great job with it, right? So that's kind of that would be my thought, that it's not bad. Constraints aren't bad. You can do a lot within them.
mm. Awesome. And just to wrap us up, one thing I'm going to be asking to every guest is to just tell us something that they're still working on so we can see if there's any great advice and insights we can crowdsource from everyone. So, what's one thing that you're still working on, haven't cracked yet, however we want to frame it?
Yeah, I mean, I've talked about data and measuring impact. It's an ongoing thing. Like, to calculate true ROI requires a level of like scientific rigor that's really just not possible. Like, we'd have to have like people who weren't receiving the training and people who were receiving the training, and that's not cool. So
Mm,
um, those sorts of things is still an ongoing process. So anybody that wants to talk about data and measuring impact and how they do it, I am always learning more about that. Like, I know it's important and I do it, but I'm not a pro at it yet. I don't know if I ever will be.
I don't know anyone who's ever claimed to be a real data pro who isn't actually working in a proper data role. So I think there'll be a lot of people hearing that and thinking, I can relate. Wonderful. You mentioned people reaching out and getting in touch. So I will put both the links to your LinkedIn profile and also the post that I mentioned about the start that started all this
Amazing.
conversation off in the description and the show notes so people can get in touch. But Sarah, thank you so much. I really appreciate you coming on the show.
Yeah, thank you. It's been great.